Recording in three, two, and one.
Oh my God, this comic book company was so great. And they paid their writers and they paid their artists and they were cranking stuff out. And then they just kind of folded.
Oh. Welcome to episode 159 of Nerdery and Murdery.
Big 159. I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Jeffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week, the highs and lows, the ups and downs, the good and the bad, and the nerd and the murd. I don't have anything of note. Do you want to take us off the nerdery side of the house?
Absolutely.
All
Today
right.
we're going to talk about CrossGen comics.
Okay.
And one of my favorites, the Brath series, which I followed for most of its run. Um, CrossGen Comics, or CrossGen, was an American comic book publisher and entertainment company that operated from 1998 to 2004. The company's assets were acquired by the Walt Disney Company in 2004 and designated to Disney Publishing Worldwide. In July 2010, Disney reestablished the brand through Marvel Comics, who announced plans to revive the CrossGen titles. CrossGen Comics Inc. was founded in 1998 in Tampa, Florida by entrepreneur Mark Alessi. And in 1999, the company acquired the Orlando-based multi-genre fan convention MegaCon from founder James Brightbill. Brightbill became CrossGen's marketing and distributing director. In January of 2000, CrossGen Comics Inc. debuted with Cross Genesis, a sneak peek at the CrossGen universe. It provided an outline of the universe, worlds, and characters of CrossGen's flagship titles that would be released 6 months later. Gina M. Villa, head of creative departments, and Mark Alessi wrote a history of the Sigil-verse before any comics were written. The head creative team consisted of Barbara Kessel, Mark Waid, and Ron Mars. Unlike other comics publishers such as DC Comics and Marvel Comics, which rely mainly on freelance writers and artists, most of CrossGen's talent were salaried employees of the company and worked out of its headquarters in Oldsmar, Florida.
So this is a good point about this that Zig talked about in the stab too. Because this has been very well documented. DC and Marvel not only underpaid their writers and their artists, but because they were freelance, they also could not get medical insurance. And that was a big thing that that people were trying to get were benefits
Mm-hmm.
for these writers and these artists. So that's really cool that that this comic book company changed how they did things
Mm-hmm.
with their writers and their artists and whatnot.
Yeah,
So
yeah, because it's less that way now with Marvel and DC.
yes,
They're actually, they're employees now, or
yes.
at least some of them. Later creators such as J.M. DeMatteis worked freelance with CrossGen Publishing finished properties. The company's publications covered a variety of genres with characters inhabiting a single shared universe. The first wave of CrossGen titles included Sigil, a military science fiction space opera, Mystic, a magical fantasy, Meridian, flavored by traditional folklore, Scion, an adventure series inspired by tales of King Arthur, and CrossGen Chronicles, a series detailing the untold history of the CrossGen universe. The protagonists of the first wave of CrossGen comics were linked in commonality by the sigil each character had received. It was a branding on their body, a marking that granted them unusual powers. The sigil and the story of the sigil bearers was a prominent aspect of the narrative. In November of 2000, the Homeric myth The First was released, and steadily over the next 3 years, CrossGen released many more titles. The following were released in 2001. Crux, based on the Atlantean myth. Sojourn, an epic fantasy in the style of Lord of the Rings. Ruse, a Victorian detective story, and Negation. In the following years, these titles were released. The horror story Route 666, which was awesome. The Wuxia comedy Way of the Rat, and the samurai drama The Path. The company enjoyed great initial success with 15 Harvey Award nominations in 2002. In 2003, other titles were released expanding the fictional universe. The sword and sorcery epic Brath, which, again, I've got one, but I don't think you can see it. Breath.
Saw a little bit of it.
Breath. See
Yeah,
now? Yeah.
a little bit of it.
Yeah, Breath number one. A limited series about Chimera, which was a limited series about a sigil bearer of the far reaches of the universe, the pirate adventure El Cazador, and two other titles that explain the origin of the sigil bearers, Solus and Mark of Chiron. Titles such as Negation and Crux blended genres, although most CrossGen titles shared a common element, such as the sigil, the presence of a mentor and a member of the godlike first. The titles rarely crossed over with each other. The major example of crossing over was Sam of Sigil, who spent 4 issues in the world of Brath and part of one issue in the world of Meridian, with the later periods also being told from Sephi's perspective in issue number 20 of Meridian. There was one company crossover event, the Negation War, but was never concluded. In 2003, CrossGen Comics Inc. changed its name to CrossGen Entertainment Inc. and formed 11 wholly owned subsidiary companies, which represented its broad-based entertainment productions and offerings. These companies were to act independently of CGE, functioning as interior business units while all working towards CGE's overall goal. With the arrangement, all current and future projects would be managed and guided by CrossGen's founding principles. The projects consisted of CrossGen Intellectual Property, CrossGen Technologies, CrossGen Publishing, CrossGen Media, CrossGen Productions, CrossGen Interactive, Megacon, CrossGen Education, Comics on the Web was the name of the company. Comics on the Web LLC, COW, was responsible for internet publishing, including Comics on the Web. CrossGen Comics Entertainment Inc. was set up to take over the publishing of all existing comic properties. Its logo would appear on anything that came from CrossGen. CG acted as a publisher for affiliate companies that would retain full ownership and control of their properties and would reap the benefits of joining with a larger company. Code 6 was another imprint of CrossGen Entertainment created to publish titles set outside of the Sigilverse, such as the Red Star, Demon Wars, and the Crossovers. All titles published with the Code 6 logo would be owned by both the creator and CrossGen Entertainment Inc., with a majority of ownership resting with CGE. CrossGen would pay upfront page rate and then split all rights and revenue 75% to 25%. Code 6 is the Florida police signal code for an escaped prisoner. It was used to describe the attitude of the creators working for Code 6. One of CrossGen's innovations was the sale of comic subscriptions via the internet. Subscribers could view all of CrossGen's titles through a web browser. The webcomics reproduced the fine color of the original, but the lettering was sometimes not quite legible. Hovering over the word or thought bubble caused it to enlarge to a readable size. A feature developed in Flash by Gabo Mendoza of Gabo Corp Studios. The online library was estimated to contain 160 issues and 4,400 pages by the end of 2002. CrossGen was among the first comic companies to publish online.
By the way, I got to back up real quick because I was just looking. Demon Wars was done by R.A. Salvatore,
Yes.
who is a popular writer.
Yes.
But for those who don't know, he's a pretty hated man in the Star Wars universe.
R.A. Salvatore?
Yes.
Drizzt Do'Urden guy?
He wrote Vector Prime, which
Okay.
is the death of Chewbacca.
Oh, I didn't know he wrote that.
Yes, he wrote Vector Prime, and a lot of Star Wars fans hate him for
Hate
Vector
him
Prime.
because of that.
Yes.
It's no longer canon, sir.
Oh, yes, it is. That's stupid. Disney's thing is stupid with that. But yeah, Vector Prime was a a book that a lot of people were very unhappy with.
Oh man. Okay, for those not in the know, not quite so deep in the nerdery universe. R.A. Salvatore or Salvatore wrote a D&D series set in Forgotten Realms called Icewind Dale Trilogy,
Mm-hmm.
which told the story of a dark elf, and it caught the community. It took him by storm, and he's, oh my God, how many Icewind Dale books has he published now?
Oh
Like
God, I don't know.
20?
I don't know.
Yeah. Oh my God. The dude is well loved by those people. I'm curious to see how they feel about Vector Prime, especially as, as being Star Wars fans, but also as being fans of his Icewind Dale stuff.
Well, and I didn't like his writing style for Vector Prime either.
Hmm.
Um, it's very, it didn't seem as Star Wars to me as it did. You could really tell he writes fantasy, and
Hmm.
it wasn't as, um, it just, I didn't like the writing style for a Star Wars book. Um, and like I said, it was the death of Chewbacca, which took all fans by surprise and made him a very hated man.
Yeah, yes. At least in that community.
Yes.
So in 2003, CrossGen found itself in a scandal over freelance payments, exposing systemic financial problems. As the news reached comic fans, sales were affected, and creative staff such as Gina Villa, Brandon Peterson, and Ron Mars began to abandon the company. Some industry observers noted the company's difficulties became apparent shortly after the Borders and Barnes& and Noble bookstore chains discontinued stocking CrossGen's trade paperback collections and returning huge numbers of unsold books for credit/refund, more than wiping out the publisher's optimistically low reserves against returns. In an interview with Mark Alisi on the Dollar Bin podcast, the root cause of CrossGen's financial collapse was said to be the result of a large decrease in the value of Perot Systems stock
Huh.
that was largely backing the company's financing. The financial plan was to lose money in the first 6 years before earning profits in the seventh year through movie and television deals. In late 2003, the company restructured, selling MegaCon to show organizer Elizabeth Widera. CrossGen filed for bankruptcy in June of 2004 and ceased publishing, leaving titles such as Sojourn, Negation War, Brath, and many others canceled mid-story. In July of 2004, Disney Publishing was interested in licensing CrossGen content, but upon discovering the company's bankruptcy, began seeking to acquire its assets instead. Founder Alisi loaned the company $75,000, but was unable to prevent the company's takeover. On November 15th, Disney purchased CrossGen's assets for $1 million, with plans to publish 4 prose hardcover novels based on the writer of J.M. DeMatteis and artist Mike Plug's Abadazad.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it. Sorry. CGE Creators Net was created to attempt to track the subsequent doing of various staff associated with the company. It has since ceased operation. As of 2008, various CrossGen domain URL names and URLs were held by cyber squatters. And in 2006, Checker Books obtained the rights to publish trade collections of various CrossGen series, starting with Sojourn. A total of 9 collected editions were part of the agreement, 2 each for Sojourn, Negation, and Scion. The single volumes for The Way of the Rat, Sigil, and The Path. There are no plans by Checker Books for more traveler-sized collections. Mark Thompson, the publisher of Checker Books, traveled to New York in 2007 and spoke with Disney representatives about reprinting further collections. No agreement has been made at the time. But according to Mark Thompson, he indicated that this would happen. In a quick follow-up interview, he expanded on things, explaining how difficult it has been to pin down what is considered full distributed, and to solve this, they are planning to propose to Disney that we catch up by putting out omnibus collections. In 2008, Checker Books published 3 CrossGen titles: Negation Hounded, Volume 3, Sigil V, 6 Planetary Union, Sojourn Volume 6, The Berserker's Tale. And in July 2010, Marvel Comics editor-in-chief Joe Quesada announced at the San Diego Comic-Con that Marvel, also a Disney-owned company, would revive a number of CrossGen titles. Marvel began to publish Ruse and Sigil in March 2011. As 4-issue miniseries both complete their runs, and a third CrossGen title, Mystic, premiered in August of 2011. Two more books, Route 666 and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, were announced during Fan Expo Canada in late August and were set to start in February of 2012, but never published due to low interest in the previous release series. However, in August of 2022, Marvel Comics announced CrossGen Tales #1, a trade paperback collecting contains the reprint original first issues of Mystic, Sigil, Ruse, and Sojourn. This is with the first time that CrossGen titles would be available in a digital format. An omnibus collection of the original Sigil series was released in 2023. It should say CrossGen titles were always available in a digital format. It's the first time they've been available since like 2010. But the comics are Cross Genesis, CrossGen Chronicles, Mystic, Sigil, Saurians, Unnatural Selection, Scion, Meridian, The First, Crux, Sojourn, Ruse, Archard's Agents. There's a couple of titles for Archard's Agents, Negation, Mark of Charon, Negation War, The Path, The Way of the Rat, Silken Ghost, Route 666, Brath, Chimera, Solus, El Cazador, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And that's what's going on inside the Sigil universe. Outside, they have Abatazad, R.A. Salvatore's Demon Wars, Trial by Fire, and R.A. Salvatore's Demon Wars, Eye for an Eye. So he did actually do a series for him. The crossovers, Lady Death, a medieval tale, Lady Death Wild Hunt, The Red Star, Space Ace, and Dragon's Lair, Masters of the Universe, which they did in like 2003. That was a really, really good comic series. John Carpenter's Snake Plissken Chronicles, and American Power. Tales of the Realm, Snake Plissken Chronicles, and Rob Zombie's Spook Show International. So they put out a lot of titles for only being around like 6 years. Again, I love Brath. I also have a trade paperback of Route 666 somewhere. It's all really good stuff, and it's all that good quality, slick paper, hyper-colored comic stuff. They all had a look to them. They were well produced. I actually liked the cover art on a lot of the ones for Brath, and Brath did have a sigil. I think it's on his chest. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. Brath basically is the story of the Romans attacking Ireland, which never really happened. Although they're not called Romans and they're not called Ireland. But yeah. It was it's really cool. I really liked it. And some of the other titles too I read. Mystic was good. I have a couple of Mystic pieces. But they just they folded up and went away. But as you said, it is nice that they started taking care of their writers and artists at the bigger companies.
Right.
Because yeah, if you worked for Image, you ended up becoming an owner eventually. But here you just got paid. You got paid like it was a regular job, which Marvel and DC eventually adopted some of those ideas, so they could get some of these people. And a lot of these people ended up going to DC or Marvel or Image or, some of the lesser ones. Dark Horse is another small comic company we really should talk about, because Dark Horse is great. They've been around forever. Late 80s, I think. Yeah. Dark Horse is awesome.
Yeah.
But they also do a lot of different comic properties, like Star Wars. They did a lot of stuff with them. Things like that. But yeah, that's about it for CrossGen Comics, other than you can still get out and find a lot of this stuff. Some of the stuff is still reprinted and in trade paperbacks. You can find it in used bookstores, of course. But there's still some newer titles out there that you can go out and find, and you can find them on Amazon or eBay too.
Oh, I'm sure. Awesome. All right, then thank you for that. And
Thank you.
with that, we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off Biography, Criminal Minds Wiki, Wikipedia, Grunge, and the Union Democrat. And this is the story of Leonard Lake and Charles Ing.
Leonard Lake and Charles Ing.
So Leonard Lake was born in San Francisco, California. When he was 6 years old, his parents separated, where he and his siblings moved in with their maternal grandmother. Lake was reportedly a bright child, but after habitually photographing his sister's nude, which his grandmother apparently encouraged, he became obsessed with pornography.
Huh.
He then reportedly extorted his sisters to perform sexual acts. Lake also collected mice and killed them by dissolving them in chemicals. In the same manner, he would later dispose of his human victims' corpses. After attending Balboa High School, Lake enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in 1964. He served 2 tours of duties in the Vietnam War as a radar electronics technician. And it was during this period that Lake was first diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. And after what was termed a delusional breakdown in Da Nang, he received psychotherapy and in 1971 a medical discharge. Lake then settled in San Jose and enrolled at San Jose State University, but dropped out after one semester after becoming enamored of the hippie lifestyle in San Francisco. He moved to a commune there and married briefly in 1975. The marriage was dissolved after his wife discovered that he was making and appearing in amateur pornographic movies, usually involving bondage or sadomasochism. For the next 8 years, Lake lived at the Greenfield Ranch, which was a 5,600-acre back-to-the-land settlement near Calpella, north of Ukiah, California. There, he met and eventually married Clara Lynn Balaz, who's nicknamed Cricket, who became involved in Lake's fantasies and appeared in many of his pornographic films. Lake had a growing fear of an impending nuclear holocaust, which prompted him to begin construction of a bunker on the settlement grounds until the owner of the property became aware of the project and ordered it halted. Lake met fellow Marine Charles Ing, originally from Hong Kong, in 1980 or 1981. Sources claim that the two met through a survivalist magazine advertisement that Lake had placed. Lake was managing the Philo Motel in Philo, California at the time. Ing had escaped from a military prison following a conviction for weapons theft and stayed at the motel for a time and then moved into a house along with Lake and uh, excuse me, Clarelyn Cricket. Several witnesses testified that Ing was very subservient and allowed Lake to order him around and to speak to him in a condescending and disparaging manner. Ing stated that he looked up to Lake, quote, like a brotherly, fatherly figure. In April of 1982, police raided the house and arrested Ing and Lake on weapons charges. Ing was returned to Fort Leavenworth to complete his sentence. Lake, though, jumped bail and began life as a fugitive using various aliases and wearing disguises in an attempt to hide his true identity. In July of 1984, Ing was dishonorably discharged after serving time for theft and desertion and rejoined Lake and Cricket. Ing first stayed in an apartment rented by Lake's sister before moving into an apartment on Lenox Avenue in San Francisco in the fall of 1984. Lake was living in Walseyville in a cabin owned by Cricket's parents by this time. Next to the cabin, Lake had built a structure described in his journals as, quote, a dungeon. Lake had already murdered his own brother, Donald Lake, and a friend, Charles Gunnar, stealing their money and identities. Again, he was on the run as a fugitive, so
Hmm.
using different identities.
Yeah, why don't I just kill my brother and steal his identity
Right. Well, and another person.
and somebody else's? Yeah, for my buddy.
Over the next year, Lake and Ing began a pattern of rape, torture, and murder. Lake and Ing targeted women, but were not hesitant to abduct entire families. After killing the men and children to get them out of the way, Lake would hold the women captive in a custom built room in the bunker at the ranch, tie them up and torture and rape them, and eventually kill them. Lake allegedly did not allow Ng to enter the rear portion of the bunker, telling him, quote, "That's my domain." Lake also lured men to the compound with the promises of work, but it would instead rob and murder them, at which point he would steal their identities. After killing the victims by shooting them, they would either bury them in shallow graves on or near the property or burn them and scatter the bones. Police found over 40 pounds of burned, crushed bone fragments scattered around the Willisville property.
This.
Charles Ng was convicted of murdering 11 people, but because of the massive amount burned, shattered bone fragments found at the cabin, they are thought to have killed as many as 25 people. Lake is known to have committed several murders without the assistance of Ng, and wrote in his journal that Ng was initially, quote, "very hesitant to get involved with my plan." Known victims include Lake's brother, his best friend, his neighbors, multiple people met through newspaper advertisements, tenants of a boarding house where Lake had rented a room, two men who had advertised gay sex, one of whom survived, and two workmates of Ng. So these are the known victims. In December of 1982, Donald Lake, who again was his younger brother, was Lake's younger brother, who was 32 at the time. Donald was hit by a train as a child and suffered mental problems as a result of the accident. He was described as a very nice gentleman by acquaintances, but Leonard resented him because of his disability, required the full attention of their mother, resulting in Leonard being raised by his grandparents. Leonard referred to him as a leech in conversations with his ex wife, Cricket, and said that he did not deserve to live. In December of 1982, Donald was living with his mother in San Francisco when Leonard stopped by on a road trip up north and asked Donald to come along to a house sitting job. Donald would never be seen again, and his mother reported him missing. Leonard resurfaced on New Year's Day in 1983 to rent a room on 19th Street under the false name Alan Dre. Leonard had stole Donald's identity and opened up a P.O. box in his name and began cashing his disability checks. And Leonard later forged a letter to their mother claiming to be Donald and that he had moved away to live with drug dealers in Reno, Nevada. It is believed that Donald was the first person murdered by Leonard Lake. May 22nd, 1983, Lake moved in with his friend Charles Gunner, who was 36. Gunner was a former postman and drama coach from Morgan Hill, California. He was best man at Lake's wedding to Cricket in 1981, and they had a lot in common as they both valued survival skills in the weaponry world. On May 22nd, Lake invited Gunner to go on a road trip to Vegas or Tahoe for rest and relaxation after his divorce. Gunner left behind his daughters with a babysitter. A couple of days later, Lake returned alone in Gunner's van and told the babysitter that Gunner ran off with a woman. Charles Gunner was never seen again.
Oh
After the
shit! What did
murder,
the babysitter do?
right, I don't know. I don't know. After the murder, Lake stole Gunner's identity and began to cash his government checks. He introduced himself as Charles Gunner to most of the people he met while living in Walseyville. Gunner's body was not found by police during their initial 1985 investigation, but was unearthed in 1992 when a subsequent owner of the Walseyville property was digging down to install a footing for a new garage. In April of 1984, Jeffrey Askren, 30 years old of Sunnyvale, vanished. His late model Honda automobile was found a few days later in the West Point area of Calaveras County near Lake's home. July 11th, and check these dates out because they're all just real close to each other. July 11th, 1984, Donald Giletti, 36-year-old radio personality from San Francisco, was spending time in his apartment expecting a visitor. Giletti was an openly gay man who lived with another man named Richard Carrazza. Giletti had placed a personal ad in a low-key newspaper offering to give oral sex to straight men, and that night a stranger knocked on the door and Giletti assumed it was someone taking him up on his offer. As soon as he opened the door, there was a man who whipped out a pistol and shot him in the head at close range. Carrazza ran from the back of the room into the study and found Giletti on the floor. Carrazza was also immediately shot in the chest and left for dead. The shooter fled, but Carrazza survived the attack. He called 911, and when the police questioned him, he was able to give a description of the shooter. He described being shot by a small Chinese man wearing prescription glasses. And Carrazza, who is the only known survivor of Lake or Ng, would go on to identify Ng as the shooter. July 25th, 1984, Henry Dubs, 29, Deborah Dubs, 33, and Sean Dubs, 1, lived in San Francisco. Harvey was selling video equipment in July of that year and placed an advertisement in a local newspaper. Deborah was speaking on the phone to a friend on July 25th when the doorbell rang at their apartment. Deborah told her friend she had to end the conversation as two men who were interested in the items had arrived at their home, and Deborah, Harvey, and Sean were never heard from again.
Hmm.
A neighbor across the alley saw an Asian man leave their residence struggling to carry a large duffel bag later in the day. The same neighbor observed an unidentified vehicle drive away from the Dubs apartment on July 26th, the day after the family disappeared, with the Asian man in the passenger seat and a bearded man driving. Another neighbor who lived in the apartment below the Dubs heard footsteps a few days after the family had been reported missing and saw an Asian man exiting the Dubs' front door with a large duffel bag and a suitcase. She walked out the door and called to the man, but he ignored her and briskly walked away down the street. Once he reached the end of the street, a vehicle quickly pulled around the corner and the man got in the passenger seat and the car then quickly sped off. Later that evening, the same neighbor was returning home and believed she could see the same man in the Dubs apartment through the living room window and once again heard footsteps going on inside. A man identifying himself as James Bright called Harvey's employer in late July and claimed that Harvey had to go to Washington for a family emergency. The unidentified man ended the conversation when Harvey's coworker became suspicious. Years later, the coworker described being played a tape by investigators and stated that the voice on the tape was quite similar to the voice she heard over the telephone, and the voice on the tape was Leonard Lake. There was a receipt in Harvey Dubs' name and video equipment from the Dubs' San Francisco home that were later found at Lake's cabin. August 1984, Maurice Rock of San Francisco disappeared from a Carl Street rooming house known as the Pink Palace. Lake had rented a room at the Pink Palace under the pseudonym Alan Dre, which he'd used before. Sometime after Rock disappeared, the woman renting the room next to Rock saw a man removing a refrigerator from his room. The man introduced himself as Steve and offered to photograph her, and she agreed, but felt unsettled and changed her mind once Steve came to her room with his camera equipment. She would later identify the man as Leonard Lake. Rock's remains were recovered from the Walseyville property. August 1984, Cheryl Okoro of San Francisco disappeared from the Pink Palace rooming house. Photographs and an 11-page letter written by Okoro and remains were recovered from Walseyville property. October 15th, 1984, we're still in 1984.
Mm-hmm.
Randy Jacobson of,
Not not far either. I mean,
no,
we talk about July to October.
yeah, and we're not done with 1984. Randy Jacobson, 36 years old of San Francisco, disappeared from the rooming house after becoming involved in a business deal with Lake. His identity was subsequently stolen by Leonard Lake. Lake also tried to steal Jacobson's van after the murder, but was unsuccessful. The van was towed away before Lake was able to move it. Jacobson's remains were buried under the chicken coop at the Walseyville property. November 2nd, 1984, Paul Cosner, who was 40 years old, was last seen in San Francisco. He was employed as a used car dealer at the time of his disappearance. His brown 1980 Honda Prelude disappeared with him. Cosner had advertised the vehicle for sale in a local newspaper and told his fiancee that he'd found a potential buyer whom he described as weird. He said he would be leaving the apartment at 7:30 p.m. to meet the buyer and would return at 8 p.m. to watch a television show with her. He was never heard from again.
Hmm.
Strange messages from an unidentified caller were left on his answering machine after his disappearance. Leonard Lake was arrested with Cosner's car on June 2nd, 1985. There were 2 bullet holes in the car, one in the front passenger door and another in the roof above the front passenger sun visor. Personal effects, including Cosner's driver's license, glasses, and other paperwork, were found buried in a bucket on the Walseyville property, but Cosner's remains have never been found. Now we're moved to 1985, January 20th, 1985, Clifford
Not far into
Peranito.
1985.
No, right into January. Clifford Toe, who was 23-year-old co-worker of Charles Ng at Dennis Moving Company in San Francisco. Clifford was last seen in San Francisco on July 20th, and he has never been heard from again. In April of 1985, Lake sold Clifford's motorcycle to a man in West Point, California, and several of Clifford's personal belongings, including an engraved pen pencil set, were discovered in an apartment owned by Ng. February 24th, 1985, Jeffrey Gerald, 25-year-old who worked as a mover at Dennis Moving Company with Ng and spent evenings playing drums for the band Crash and Burn. On February 24th, he vanished after saying he was going to help Ng move for a side job. The following day, the owner of a church youth campground in Walseyville confronted Leonard Lake's neighbor, Lonnie Bond, and a friend for firing guns to the trees while camp was in session nearby. After Bond and his friend explained to the man that they only shoot into the dirt, the camp owner walked next door to the house of a man he knew as Charles Gunner and knocked on the door. After several minutes of knocking, Charles Gunner, who was actually Leonard Lake, answered the door with a sheet wrapped around his arm and otherwise appeared to be naked. The sheet did appear to have a significant amount of blood on it. When questioned, Lake said he severely cut himself on a circular saw. A doctor in Jackson, California, later testified he treated Lake on February 25th, 1985, for a fresh gunshot wound to his fingers. There was a magazine advertisement that was later posted by Charles Gunner for the sale of Jeff Gerald's car. April 12th to 15th, 1985, Michael Carroll had served time with Ng in Fort Leavenworth, and they remained acquainted afterwards. He and his girlfriend, Kathleen Allen, who was 18, were spending time in a Milpitas, California motel room where they were temporarily staying. At 10 p.m. one night, Carol told Allen that she had to do something and would be back in the morning, but she never returned. A few days later, on April 14th, Allen received a phone call at the Safeway where she worked. The caller told her that her boyfriend, Michael, was at Lake Tahoe and may have been shot. She immediately told her boss she had to leave and go to Lake Tahoe to be with him, and she was last seen getting into a brown gold car with a bearded man in the parking lot of the Safeway. The following day, Allen called her boss at the Safeway and requested 4 weeks off to be with Carol in Lake Tahoe. A later search of telephone records revealed that each of these calls to the Safeway were made for someone at the Lake Walseyville property. Allen also appeared in a videotape found at Lake's home, and her last paycheck was sent to a town near his cabin. Carroll was also mentioned in the videotape, and his driver's license was found at the cabin. April 19th, 1985.
They're
Huh?
they're not just looking for victims, they're looking for money as well. That's what it
Yeah.
seems like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Every
Yeah.
couple of weeks, it's like, oh, we gotta go rob and kill some people.
Yeah. So we're going to get to those neighbors now. Lonnie Bond Sr. and his live-in girlfriend, Brenda O'Connor, and their son, Lonnie Bond Jr., who was 1, and their family friend, Robin Scott Stapley. The Bond family moved into the house next door to Lake in January of 85. Lonnie Sr. and O'Connor disliked their neighbor, who they knew as Charles Gunnar, and who they claimed was extremely obnoxious, rude, and determined. And as we had talked about earlier, he disliked them because they constantly fired weapons on their property and regularly left the main gate to their shared driveway unlocked.
Yeah.
O'Connor felt uncomfortable with Lake because he repeatedly asked her to pose naked for him. On April 18th, 1985, Bond and a group of friends returned to a friend's house from Yuma, Arizona motorcycle rally. Bond armed himself with a .22 pistol and left for Walseyville, telling a friend he was going to confront Lake over his sexual advances towards O'Connor. Likewise, Stapley had picked up a newly purchased .22 Ruger on April 16th and joined Bond in Walseyville. None of them were ever seen again. Calaveras County Sheriff Claude Ballard, said investigators believe O'Connor appeared in a videotape which Ng cuts her clothes off with a butterfly knife as Lake tells her, quote, baby is going to be taken away, and was, quote, sound asleep like a rock. When Lake was arrested on June 2nd, Lonnie Bond's license plate was affixed to the car he was driving, which was the Honda Prelude he had stolen from Paul Cosner.
Switching plates.
Yeah. Police said that Lake was in possession of Stapley's gun and a driver's license, initially identified himself as Stapley when he was arrested. The bodies of Lonnie Sr. and Shapley were found buried in Walseyville in a shallow grave about a mile from Lake's property, but O'Connor and Lonnie Jr. have never been found. On June 2nd, 1985, Ng was caught shoplifting a vise from a hardware store in South San Francisco and fled the scene on foot, throwing the vise into the trunk of a brown Honda. Lake attempted to pay for the vice, but the police had arrived. Officers noticed that Lake no bore resemblance to the photo on his driver's license, which carried the name of Robin Scott Stapley, who we had talked about earlier, San Diego man who had been reported missing several weeks earlier. Lake was arrested after a gun equipped with a prohibited silencer was found in the trunk of his vehicle, which was the Honda Prelude, and was later positively identified via fingerprint search. At the station, Lake was placed in an interrogation room where he was given a pen, paper, and glass of water. And a short time later, a detective entered the room to conduct an interview and found Lake violently convulsing on the floor. The notepad contained a brief suicide note. At the hospital, it was determined that he swallowed cyanide pills that he had sewn into his clothes, and Lake never regained consciousness and died 4 days later on June 6th. The license plate on Lake's vehicle was registered to Lonnie Bond, but the VIN of the Honda was registered to Paul Cosner. A utility bill was found in the Honda, which led detectives under the command of San Francisco Police Homicide Lieutenant Gerald McCarthy to the property in Walseyville, where they found Stapley and Bond's trucks, and they found the dungeon. In a makeshift burial site nearby, police unearthed, again, over 40 pounds of burned and crushed human bone fragments, corresponding to a minimum of 11 bodies. A phone line trench 100 feet long and 10 feet deep was found to be filled with trash, personal effective victims, and 2 intact skeletons. There was another intact body that was found under the chicken coop that we had talked about earlier. 2 bodies found about a mile from the cabin were later identified as Bond and Stapley. They had been gagged and executed by gunshots to the head. Going around the ground near the cabin, police noticed loose dirt, leading them to 2 buried 5-gallon buckets. One contained an assortment of ID papers and personal possessions, which suggested that the total victim count could be as high as 25. In the other were Lake's handwritten journals for the years 1983 and 84 and 2 videotapes. One videotape contained a 20-minute long manifesto recorded on October 23rd, 1983, in which Lake discusses his plan to build a cell to enslave women. The other tape, labeled M Ladies, documented the torture of Kathleen Allen and Brenda O'Connor. In one scene, Lake is heard telling O'Connor that her family is not liked by the neighborhood, to which O'Connor replies, "So we'll leave." And Lake coldly answers, "Oh, you've already left. We've closed you down." Ng later tells O'Connor, "You can cry and sob like the rest of them, but it won't do any good. We are pretty cold-hearted, so to speak." And in another scene, Allen is seen tied to a bed as Lake tells her, "I'm having a little war within myself between what I want to do and what we might call the decent thing to do. And for the moment, the decent thing to do is winning, so rest." They were
Wow.
both then subsequently murdered. Lake's ex-wife Cricket cooperated with investigators and received legal immunity from prosecution. Court records stated that she turned over weapons and other materials to authorities during the investigation, and she was called as a key witness in Ng's trial in 1999. In a surprise move, Ng's lawyer William Kelly dismissed Cricket without asking her any questions. Kelly later declined to explain his actions. Cricket was on the witness stand for a
He
few.
puts her up there, and anything she says is going to just damn his
Right,
client. That's probably
probably. And so,
why.
yeah, probably. And that's why I was like, nope, I have no questions.
Yeah. No questions.
Cricket was on the witness stand for a few minutes as Kelly read sections of her immunity agreement. She had been expected to shed light on what happened inside the mountain cabin that her parents owned and rented to her and Lake. It was later revealed that she had removed boxes of papers and videotapes from the Walseyville cabin in the time between Lake's arrest and the initial police search. Many videotapes referenced in Lake's journals were never recovered by investigators. Ng, who never legally obtained U.S. citizenship, was captured in a department store in Calgary, Alberta, Canada on July 6, 1985. A store security guard suspected Ng of shoplifting in the ensuing conversation, Ng shot the security guard. Though he was wounded, the security guard was able to disarm and detain Ng until the police arrived. He then served 4.5 years in a Canadian prison and tried to fight extradition to the United States on the ground that he would be subject to capital punishment.
Dumbass. He got away
Yeah.
in Canada
Uh-huh.
and he gets busted for shooting a security guard and shoplifting.
Right. I know.
What a moron. I'm sorry,
In
please go ahead.
No, you're fine. In 1991, he was extradited to California, where he was indicted on 12 counts of first-degree murder. Despite the video evidence and the detailed information in Lake's diaries, Ng maintained he was merely an observer and that Lake planned and committed all the kidnaps, rapes, and murders unassisted. In February of 1999, Ng was convicted of 11 of the 12 homicides, 6 men, 3 women, 2 male infants. Jurors deadlocked on the 12th charge, the murder of Paul Costner, but Ng was sentenced to death. The presiding judge noted, quote, Mr. Ng was not under any duress, nor does the evidence support he was under the domination of Leonard Link. The last report as of 2022, Ng was still incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison.
Yeah, California doesn't do the death penalty anymore.
Correct. The last execution in California was in 2006. In 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom signed an executive order placing a moratorium on the death penalty in California. So he will probably sit there the rest of his life.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you know my stance on the death penalty. I don't think it works. And honestly, I think being in San Quentin might be worse.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be. I mean,
if it's anything like Huntsville, it's probably awful.
Oh, yeah. Well,
yeah, it's like 100 degrees out there.
Well, and prisons shouldn't be comfortable.
No.
You know, I mean, they should be awful. It's prison. You're in there for committing a crime. I don't think it should be, happiness and roses and cotton candy and everything. No, 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 no. But anyway, that's the story of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng.
Well, thank you, sir. That's really amazing.
Amazing?
That's amazing. It is okay. No, the story itself isn't amazing. That ride is amazing, and how they went from 1984 to what 1985,
Yeah,
or 83 to 85.
Yeah.
Just every couple of months, just pillaging.
Right.
Yeah,
I
basically
mean,
modern day Vikings.
Yeah, these were these were two monsters. These were two monsters. We talk about the monsters quite a bit. These were definitely two monsters that had to be taken away. They had to be put away somewhere. And Leonard Lake, I mean, he died before he served any time, but they both deserve to be removed from the public.
Yes, removed from the public. And I would imagine cyanide poisoning is probably not pleasant.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either. So yeah, thanks for taking that journey with me. That'll end our week on Nerdery Murdery. As always, you can find more information about us on nerderymurdery.com. You can find links to what we talked about, plus pictures of everything we talked about here. Plus, you can find the link to our YouTube page, which Zig so often updates.
Yes, there are several videos about CrossGen comics on there, as well as examples and some other things, especially some of those web comics. They've got a lot of pages of those, so you can actually see what we're talking about.
Awesome. Appreciate all the work you do on that. You can also find the link to our merchandise page, or if you wish to show off your Nerdery Murdery fandom, please do consider purchasing something from there. That, along with our patrons, you can find the link to our Patreon, where if you wish to donate to the show, that and our merchandise do go with the costs that are associated with the show, help keep us going, help keep us producing, and keep bringing you this fun information that you hear from us week in and week out. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. Last but not least, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It really helps us and helps others find our content that may be looking for the subject matter we talk about. So with that,
I have been Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Jeffrey with your Murdery.
Cue the music.